It's the Fitness Lab Pittsburgh podcast, a new episode every week. A podcast about movement, part of making your life complete. Fitness Lab Pittsburgh, aka FitLabPGH, brings you interviews with people in the Pittsburgh area who understand movement is part of what makes life complete. Looking for a new movement idea or just want to hear interesting stories about people who make movement a priority? This is the podcast for you. Whether you consider the gym, dojo, or fitness studio your third place, or just want to learn more about movement, activity, and fitness to enhance your life, give FitLabPGH a listen. We interview locals in the Pittsburgh area who make Pittsburgh a great place to move. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Subscribing is free and gives you notifications when we release new episodes. Each podcast episode will be long enough to pique your interest and short enough to hold your attention. Have an idea for an episode? Know somebody we should interview? Or just want to connect with us? Drop us an email, fitlabpgh@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at fitlabpgh. Already a fan of FitLabPGH? Check out our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast for movement professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers weekly interviews with movement professionals featuring topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you enjoy our next interview, starting now. FitLabPGH firmly believes that movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. That's why, in addition to our interviews, one of which you'll hear shortly, 3 times a week we release movement tip and lifestyle hack, 1-minute videos, available on most social media channels, including YouTube and Instagram. We also feature a FitLab Pittsburgh Features, a written feature every Thursday for 2-legged and 4-legged movers. Today, we sit down and we talk with a track and field coach. A little bit different, and you'll probably learn that track and field isn't just for kids and college students, but for adults too. FitLabPGH back with another podcast. We did not have to cross a bridge or go through a tunnel, and I already know it's going to be a good interview because we were doing it at a coffee shop. I actually found today's guest from a post his wife made on the Facebook group founded by Larry Gioia and Aaron Watson, Connection University. So Larry, ABCD, and somebody was looking for a track coach for adult athletes, or for an adult athlete. And today's guest's wife said, hey, my husband is a track and field coach. You might want to contact him. So we were with Dwayne Waite Jr. He is the owner, founder, chief person behind Heroes Track Club, Pittsburgh native who left. And as he said, the boomerang brought him back. So Dwayne, thanks for taking time to talk to FitLab Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Ben, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be able to talk about, track and field and, being fit in the Berg.
And I think what's always interesting is when people leave places and come back. We were chatting a little bit before the interview as you went to Elon College, which not in a negative way, but is way out in the middle of nowhere. And for somebody who grew up in Penn Hills, I have the advantage of the question here beforehand. How did you pick Elon College? Because you would think very, very rural, growing up in a suburban to city neighborhood type thing. It's like, I don't want to go way out in the boondocks.
Yeah. So it's Elon University now. They switched from the Fighting Christians to the Elon Phoenix in 2001. So that was, I think, a pretty good change for them. So what was cool about Elon was that they recruited very heavily in Western Pennsylvania. And at that time in the early 2000s, I was looking to just get out of Pittsburgh. Right. I mean, everybody was leaving Pittsburgh and nothing really was going on in the city. So I was like, well, let me try going down south. And Elon had a beautiful campus, a great business program. And so that's what attracted me there. And after Elon hung out in Charlotte, worked in Charlotte, grew my love for running and fitness and track and field again, and trying to live that life back at home.
And I think it's always interesting that there are some people who they reach adulthood and something happens that makes them active. And then there's other people who they're active as kids and they maybe take time off in college or continue it in college. So I'm curious, as a kid growing up, were you an active kid? And if you were, was it mom and dad saying, hey, get the heck out of the house and don't come back? Or was it more organized activities?
It was both. So we were part of the group in Pittsburgh, part of that community that you were out of the house whenever you were done with your homework and everything, and you didn't come back into the house until the streetlights came on. Then it was time to go home, wash up and eat. And so grew up always either playing capture the flag or the game, we always called it release. I don't know. It's in different geographical locations. The game is different, but it's like cops and robbers basically, but you're always running. And then there were structured activities too. I grew up, I played baseball for 8 years, did soccer for 8 years. And then in middle school, I was always one of the faster ones. And so the gym teacher was like, well, Dwayne, how about you try track? And I was like, okay. Yeah, I like to run, and playing football, I didn't have the greatest hands. So I was like, well, if I could just run and not get hit, this would be kind of fun. And so, just ended up loving track and field because I jumped as well. And so I did that all throughout the rest of middle school, all of high school, and then in some college, and then out of school, and started to teach, and I loved working with the kids. I was like, well, let me try this coaching thing too. And so went from assistant coach to head coach whenever I had that opportunity, and then just fell in love with not just the sport, but introducing the sport to different students and athletes who, were trying to find a niche for them to be active.
And I think what's interesting, I think the general gist of what your answer is going to be, but typically when somebody says I run, they're going to be asked, well, what's your fastest 10K time or what's your fastest marathon time? And I know one of the reasons I was interested in interviewing you is that's not the type of athletes that you coach. You coach shorter distances. So talk a little bit about kind of how long a distance you've tried running in competition, how you've just settled on the shorter distances, and also coaching for the shorter distances.
Oh man. Okay. So there's a lot there. So whenever I was looking for myself into running, I knew that I could be really, really fast for a short period of time. I remember in middle school, at the end of every winter, so at the beginning of the spring, we had these tryouts, and you do a mile run, half mile run, 400, and then 100 meters. And thankfully, you did them in different days. And I remember doing a mile, and it was like 6:45 or something. But I was tired. I wanted to throw up. I hated every minute of it. And then whenever I got to the 100, I was like, this felt good. And plus I won. And so I was like, this felt even better. And so that's how I thought of seeing the short distance was going to be my thing. And then watching the Olympics, and at that time, late 90s, it was Maurice Green. And so watching, I remember watching the trials, and he kicked off his shoes in the 100 meters and got the fire extinguisher. And they were just, the personality of the sprinters was just so different than your quarter milers and milers. I was like, I think that fits me. And so on the flip side of coaching the short distance, it's interesting because I look for athletes who have power, who have speed, and who are explosive, but then trying to talk to those runners who think that they're sprinters, but might be better as 400 is pretty much a sprint nowadays, but who might have more endurance to be a solid 800 runner or even a fast miler, trying to go through different type of mechanics and speed workouts to not just tell them, but to show them that they're, better fit elsewhere.
And I know just from talking to Coach Caulfield at California University, at the elite level, you think 800 meters is kind of that in between. There are runners who are 800-meter runners who maybe also double in the 400. And then there's 800-meter runners who may double in either the 1500 or if they happen to have a track meet where they run the mile. And these are individuals who are running big mileage. They may be running as much as 100 miles a week if they're at the elite level. Whereas for somebody who's a sprinter where they're, if it's indoors, 60 meters, or if they're doing 100 meters or 200, what would be a typical training load for somebody who's really good? I mean, we're not talking in addition to time in the gym, but how many miles a week would they be running? Since that's how runners always wonder.
You see, so you're asking for the 400-meter runners and lower?
400 meters and lower, say a really good Division I athlete to above.
Yeah, so I do treat my 200 and 100-meter runners a little bit differently than I would treat the 400 to 200-meter runners. The amount of mileage or distance for my 200 and 100-meter runners are probably, in a week, probably under, I could safely say 5 miles, with very little of that being 100, full lactic threshold running. Because I see in the beginning of the season to the off season, we don't do a ton of lactic threshold runs, or you're running full speed. I personally don't see the use of that kind of hardcore running. We get up there in the 80-90%, but in terms of overall running, we'll do. For 200 and 100-meter runners, we'll go up to a couple of 300-meter runs, maybe the occasional 400 if I feel like their endurance is lacking and that they hate those type of workouts. But in a week's time, probably under 5 miles. For 400-meter runners, we'll go a little bit higher, so probably closer to the 8 to 9 mile range. Because even for my rare 1 to 2 milers, I am a low mileage type of coach. So even for my cross country runners, they probably won't even get over 25 to 30 miles because I have them in the gym, or I do some sprint workout, which would be 400 or mile repeats for them to get that sprint base ready for them. So in short, 200, 100-meter runners are around 5, 200, 400-meter runners around 10, and then my 1 to 2 milers, under 25.
And then I know we were also chatting before we started recording. You're a big believer in resistance training in addition to that, which is not controversial, but it's kind of new age, and some old age coaches would say, well, to get faster, you need to run more. And you've had a different experience with that. You've a big fan of resistance training. How did that come about? Was that after you started coaching, or was that more when you were a track and field athlete in high school and running some events your first couple of years in college? Did you realize, hey, weight training really helps me. I think it could help other athletes too?
Yeah, no, great question. That was my sprint coach in high school. So I was super lucky. He was one of the assistant coaches, or one of the head coaches, for the Wings of Moon. It was a very popular track club in the early 2000s, and he was adamant of making sure that we were strong and our muscles could endure the type of sprinting that they demanded us to do. And that's really I would probably be an offshoot of his coaching philosophy of making sure that we were athletic before we would run. And so, because he was very demanding, but I appreciated that. And so that's how I base my training, that I do a lot of speed-based work. And for the athlete to benefit from it and not be injured of it, they have to have resistance training. We need strength training, because to endure the type of runs and training that I demand of them, they need to be strong. They need to be athletic.
I'm curious, because you were describing when you were growing up, it was get out of the house after the homework until the streetlights come on. Do you notice that a lot of the youth athletes that you get, maybe you're not as athletic as you remember you and your friends were, because maybe they don't have that same mentality because it's a different time? It's more organized. Mom and dad are arranging play times, or there's organized play rather than, capture the flag, which I had a good time with. And I still fondly remember my dad and I and my sister and a friend of mine playing wiffle ball in the front yard where the concrete sundial was second base, which probably wouldn't happen today.
That's right. Yeah. Oh gosh. Like I remember wiffle ball. Yeah. With, it's like, oh yeah, that's so-and-so's car. Yeah. That's second base and you have to tag it. And, oh yeah. Or, having the trash can. Yeah. If the ball hits the can, it's a strike. Yeah. So there aren't those type of stories anymore, with those athletes. And it's interesting. Like whenever I was coaching the high school that I taught at in Charlotte, I really had to bring that aspect of play into practice. And so, for example, we would play capture the flag for cross country practice because it got them running. They'd be so weighed down at practice sometimes because it was demanding. I threw in just some playground stuff where we'd play this game. It's a terrible name, but it's called Assassins. But you get this index card of a number of athletes that have certain amount of points, and you have to chase those people, and they turn themselves in, and people would get their points accumulated for taking those athletes out. But it was fun, and they're like, oh, we should do this, not in practice. It was like, well, yeah, these are the games we played, just out in the street. But yeah, like that aspect of having, unstructured, running is gone. I have an athlete right now whose dad texts me for workouts, or else she wouldn't run. They wouldn't be out and about, being active. They would just be, at home watching Netflix, or, some of them who are great students are, having doing their summer homework, which is fine, but they should get out there and be active on their own.
And I know the ethos of FitLab Pittsburgh and Moving to Live, our sister podcast, is movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the way I became aware of you is there was an adult who was looking for track and field competition. And I know that if you want to run a marathon, there's the Pittsburgh Marathon, there's the Great Race if you want to do a 5K, there's even the Liberty Mile if you want to do a mile. What is it like for people who maybe don't want to run those long distances? 5K for some people would be a long distance.
Absolutely.
But they still want to run, and they're outside of the high school, college, elite level. They just want to do it. Kind of talk about how you work with those and where people find competitions to run 100 meters, 200 meters, high jump, etc., because you typically don't see a lot of that in Pittsburgh, although I'm sure there may be some. Yeah,
so talk about a huge gap. Leaving college, I was the same way. It was like, I'm a 200 runner, 100 meter runner, the occasional 400 if I absolutely have to. I call that the Superman sprint. But to be active and to run, in a lot of places you have to do a 5K, and being a sprinter going to a 5K is one of the toughest transitions in the world.
I think I remember Jackie Joyner-Kersee or Florence Griffith Joyner mentioning after winning the Olympics that they were going to run a 5K, and the best they ever got was like 20 minutes because it's just entirely different events.
It's so different. And so, yeah, so speaking to that, of where to find those track events or those shorter distance events, there's the Three Rivers Association through the USA Track and Field. They're probably the biggest organization where masters, which thankfully are now 30 and over. It used to be 35, but now it's 30. So everybody, more people can compete, and there are some open meets for anybody 18 and over can run. I know Slippery Rock does an open meet at least 2 to 3 times in the spring. Cal U does one open meet. the Spire Institute in Ohio. I believe I want to say it's Geneva. They do a open track and field meet, but it's hard because not only do you want to run, but you want to be able to train to get to those competitions and compete. Because there's a competition factor and there's a team factor too that people sometimes forget, that you're out there running, but it's a lot of fun to train with others and to compete with others. And so that's a major reason why I started Heroes Track Club. So not only to train those high school athletes, 13 to 18 years old, but also those, amateur, adult, semi-pro and maybe pro athletes who want to run under a club and train under a club in the greater Pittsburgh area, because that's an area that I don't think is being addressed.
And I don't know this. That's why I'm asking the question. Are there a growing number of, for lack of a better term, adults in Pittsburgh, post-collegiate, who are interested in running the shorter distances? Are you finding the numbers are increasing?
Yes. Thankfully, because it was an idea. I was like, well, maybe there's a niche, and I put it out there, and the requests have been coming, from a couple times a quarter to now, getting a couple times of a month now of people moving in. It's like, hey, I was a part of this track club. Where are your practices? How do I get a uniform? Where do you guys compete? And I asked for the age, at the bottom of a questionnaire on my website, and now I'm seeing the 1980s or the early 1970s. Like, yes, my people. So there's I thought that there was a niche, and there's certainly a gap. But if there was a niche to be addressed, I'm steadily seeing more and more, your post-collegiate or even just those who are interested in just sprinting. I was a former football player he's obviously not going to play football, but they like to run, and so where they can do that. So steadily seeing the idea of fulfilling that need in Pittsburgh. So it's kind of cool.
We're talking with Dwayne Waite. He is the founder and head coach of Heroes Track Club. My favorite question I always like to ask people for FitLab Pittsburgh is movement activity or activities that you're going to do at some point. Some people call it a bucket list, or some people say, if I get the time, I'm going to do this. Is there any activity or activities that you have in the back of your mind you kind of want to do?
Oh, of course. I in the next couple of years, I would love to compete in the 100 and 200 in the U.S. Track and Field Masters Championships. So I want to get there.
And I think they have age groups up to 85 plus now.
That's right. So if I start now, I could have a 50-year career in running. So that'd be fantastic. I want to do that. I also I would love to be a official, some type of track official for world championships or a U.S. championship, because just being with athletes is a ton of fun. Being on a coaching staff of a U.S. team, whether it's the AAF World Juniors staff or something like that, just being a part of athletes would be a lot of fun. Another thing on my bucket list is to take a group of athletes to the U.S. Track and Field Club Championships down in Florida. I want to do that. Working solely with high school athletes, that'd be a little bit tough to compete. Opening up to the youth from the 6 to 13, but I have to grow my staff. Doing it with 2 other people would be a little bit tough, but growing a staff and being able to do that would be fun. And then, getting to New Balance championships with an athlete would be a lot of fun. I did that Well, I did that before, but maybe getting a New Balance winner on part of my team would be a lot of fun. So hoping to do that someday too.
And I've been remiss. I usually ask this at the beginning of the interview, but you've got a Heroes Track Club sweatpants on. You're standing in line at your favorite coffee shop, and somebody says, "What's Heroes Track Club? What's your 30-second wait before your coffee's ready? What's your 30-second definition of that?"
Oh, man. Okay, so Heroes Track Club is a AAU and U.S. Track and Field sanctioned club where we have high school athletes, masters, and semi-pro athletes under one roof to train, compete, and overall just be better athletes and runners.
We're FitLab Pittsburgh. We're a podcast that believes movement should be a lifestyle. As I told Dwayne, there's no way in the world I would ever be a sprinter. I would probably do a 35-second 100 meters, but it is a movement activity that you can do up to 90 plus. And if you're interested in the Pittsburgh area, we'll have extensive show notes. So check Dwayne out and the Heroes Track Club. Dwayne, thanks for taking time on a Saturday morning for meeting with us and also introducing me to a new coffee shop.
Oh, no problem, Ben. I love talking about track and field and runners, and thank you for, having this podcast in Pittsburgh. So hopefully this fragmentation and what you're doing of putting everybody together, we can start to talk to each other.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of FitLabPGH, brought to you by Moving to Live. Intro and exit music is Marathon Man by Jason Shaw. Check out the show notes for contact info for our latest guests, links to other information mentioned in the episode, and links to our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise for professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Your free subscription gets you notified when we release a new episode. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email us at fitlabpgh@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at fitlabpgh and like us on Facebook. If you enjoy our podcasts, please tell your friends about us and consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Make FitLabPGH a go-to place to learn more about movement in the Pittsburgh area. Until next time, keep on moving.